Hey guys, and welcome back to UnicoDev. A while ago I created a video showing how to use Google Authentication in your desktop app. Unfortunately, the method that I used in that video just recently got deprecated and no longer works. I will leave the link in the description. So today I'm gonna do an update video that is gonna show you a better method to authenticate your desktop applications using Google Sign-In. I'm actually gonna show you two different methods and you can pick whichever you want. Now, first of all, let's see why this method is being deprecated and what this method actually implies. If you haven't watched the original video on how to authenticate using Google, I strongly encourage you to watch that one because most of the code is gonna be the same. We're just gonna add something to it and update it so that, now it works. So I encourage you to watch the video that is popping up on the top right of the screen before watching this one. So the way that the Google Authentication workflow works for desktop apps is that you open a browser in another window, the user authenticates and receives a token, and then the user somehow gives the token back to the client application. Now the issue that we're facing is how to get the token back to the client. In my previous video, for the sake of simplicity, I used the manual copy-paste method. What this method implies is, once the user is authenticated on the browser, the user will then receive a token and he will manually copy it and paste it onto the application. I'm gonna show you clips of the video where this method worked. And as you can see, that's just what it is. It's a really simple method, it's not really user-friendly, but it does the job. Now, as you can see though, on the docs, it's now saying that this option is being deprecated, and yes, they deprecated it. Like just a few days ago, I think a couple of weeks ago, this bug was reported, showing an invalid request error when you were trying to use this manual copy-paste method. And in fact, I can show you right now, this is the exact same code we used in the previous tutorial, and if we try to do the same exact thing, we're gonna get a invalid request error. It's in Italian, I don't know why, probably because my main language is Italian, but as you can see, yeah, it's the same thing. And the reason is because the app is not "secure". Okay, you know what, I don't blame them, they said that the option was being deprecated, so yeah, what can you do? Anyway, even if manual copy-paste is the easiest way to get the token back to the client, there are other methods that are not complicated to implement, and those are what we're gonna see right now. So in the GitHub repo for this code, I added two different branches. The master one is the one on the old code that no longer works, but I'm gonna keep it here just because, Google could magically make stuff work again. It doesn't usually happen, but it could happen, so I'm just gonna leave it here. And then we're gonna have the two different methods that I'm gonna explain in this video. Okay, so the first method we're gonna be looking at is the Loopback IP address method. Basically what this does is, instead of making the user copy the token and bring it to the client, we basically have a local listener on a certain port, and as soon as the request goes through, there is a redirect to this port, and we can get the token to the client that way. Okay, so this is the updated code. Before, we used to just open the URL and go to this page to authenticate the user. And the redirect URI parameter was the copy-paste redirect URI that no longer works, aka this one right here. Unfortunately, this one is deprecated. Okay, so now instead of using that one, we're gonna use a localhost redirect. So the page after the user is authenticated is gonna go back to localhost on a certain port that you can specify. Just make this any unused port by the client. So in this case, the redirect URI is gonna be just a localhost with the specified port that you can choose as you please. Now, after opening the URL, we actually also want to listen to that same port. So I created here an HTTP code listener. I mean, you don't have to worry about this code. All the thing that it does is that it just listens on a localhost port and will return a response once it gets something. So now, as you can see in the request, there is also a query parameter. I mean, it's hard to see in the URL, but there is a code query parameter. Where is it? Oh, okay, there is none here, of course, because the request didn't go through. But if I try again with this new code, you're gonna be able to see it. So let's sign in with Google. As you can see, bruh. Oh, right. Always remember when you include my code to also include your own API key, and also right here to include your own client ID and client secret. I already went through this in the last video, but since I'm here, I'm gonna do it again with you guys. Now, since this is a test project, I don't really care if I show you my API key. So you can just get it from here, just on the project settings. So this is where you get your API key. And instead, for the client ID and client secret, you have to do something else. To get the client ID, what you have to do is go to the Google Cloud Console and select your own project, which is, in my case, Nico the Bot, for some reason. Then go in API and Services Credentials. Okay, and right here you have all of the client IDs. In my case, let's just generate a brand new one, and it has to be an OAuth client ID. Now, we are developing a desktop application, so let's make it a desktop application type. We're gonna call it, desktop client tree is just fine, and let's just create it. Okay, great, and now we have the client ID and the client secret that we can paste right here. Okay, and now that this is done, we can test the code once again, and as you can see, sign in with Google, and I'm gonna select my account, and there you go, success. I'm gonna explain what is happening right here in just a moment, but as you can see, in the request itself, we have a code query parameter, which is this one. Now, I already explained this in the last video, but this code is basically the token that the client needs in order to get a refresh token, so to actually authenticate. So all we need to do is send this code back to the client, and then we are on the right track. So as you can see in the redirect URI right here, we are actually sending the request back to localhost. And right here in the code listener, we are listening to that request. So all that we are doing right here is checking if the request contains a query parameter, which is our code. And if it is, then we're gonna return that code. So as you can see right here, we're gonna invoke this action event. And as a parameter, we're gonna have the code. And this action right here is defined when we start listening. So basically, we're gonna start listening for the code, and then as soon as we manage to get the token, we're gonna execute these lines of code. And now this token right here is the exact same token that the user was copy-pasting in the past. So I just copied the code from the last video that actually takes this token and makes it into a refresh token where the user is actually authenticated. And naturally, we are signing in with Google, so this is the google.com provider. But, you know, if you're using Facebook, Twitter to authenticate, or GitHub, it's gonna be really similar. Like, there is always gonna be this method. You just have to somehow get the token back to the client. And as you can see on the client right here in the console, we're gonna have the information about our user. We're gonna have the ID token and their email and all of that stuff. So basically now you can authenticate any request with this user. And it works, this method still works. So now, as you can see, this is really simple to set up in your project, you don't really have to do anything. Now, one slight issue with this method though that I found is that the HTTP listener might not work. Now, I'm just listening on a local port, so my firewall shouldn't hate me, okay? The firewall should say, it's fine, it's just a localhost port, there is no trouble. But there are some users that have some wacky firewalls, and this is even documented in the documentation of Firebase, which could deny these requests. This is why in this tutorial I'm also gonna give you an alternative method just in case the previous one I described doesn't work. Okay, so now let's go to this other method. Oh, actually, before going to the next method, something I failed to mention before is the response the user gets. So right here, as you can see, this is pretty ugly. The user just gets a text response that says, "Success, you can return to the app now." Now you can customize this and make it your own web page and make it beautiful. So, you know, you can change this. All you have to do is go right here in the HTTP code listener and change this line right here. This line could be an HTML and could be whatever you want. Naturally, you could get this from a file, or this line could even be a redirect to another web page that you have hosted on the web, and you can make this beautiful success sign-in page. Just remember that you have to tell the user to get back into the app. Alright, so now that that's sorted, we can actually go back to the new method. Okay, so this method is very similar to the other one, meaning that we use the redirect URI to actually bring the token somewhere else. But this time we are not sending the token to localhost, we're actually sending it to our own custom web page. Now this web page right here is a Google Cloud Function. If you guys don't know what a Cloud Function is or how it works, there is a video that is going to be suggested right now in the top right of your screen. I made a tutorial generally about how Cloud Functions work, so you can go check that out if you need more insight. Anyway, if you already know how the Cloud Functions work, or you're just back from watching that video, we can continue. So what is this cloud function going to do? Well, I'm gonna show you right now. Okay, so this is the cloud function code, which by the way is gonna be in Firebase/functions in the GitHub repository. So this is the cloud function that we are invoking on the redirect URI. Basically what it does is that it takes the code, which is, if you remember, the one we are receiving from the request, this one, the one that we were previously stealing from localhost. So it takes this code and it puts it on the database. So it puts it on the real-time database. Okay, so let me show you it in action right now. So we do sign in with Google and it's the same thing. Oh, come on. Yeah, right, before doing this, you need to set your client ID and client secret again. But this time it's actually different. You cannot use the client ID and client secret you previously used. For this method to work, you actually have to create a web application. You might say, why? Well, this is gonna come useful in just a moment. So just create another credential if you want to use this method, make it an OAuth client ID, and this time for this method, instead of having a desktop app, you need to have a web application. So, I mean, I'm just gonna call it web client 4, okay, whatever. Before clicking on create though, you have to add an authorized redirect URI, or the application is not going to work. So you need to add an URI, and this URI is going to be exactly the cloud function URI. Naturally, this cloud function is going to be different for you. Actually, let me just write this here. This is going to be your project ID, and this might also be different if you host the function on another region. But if you go in the functions tab right here, you can actually see where your function is hosted, and you can get the URL of the function from right here. So once you deploy your cloud function, you can see here the URL that you have to insert. So anyway, let's insert this URL right here, and now let's do create. Okay, so now we can use this client ID and this client secret, and the API key is always the same. I just gotta add it back in. Okay, great, it's already in somehow. Okay, so now we're gonna try again. We're gonna sign in with Google, and as you can see, once we get into this page and actually sign in, as you can see, our auth token is gonna be stored on the database. Now, where exactly is the auth token being stored and why? Now, the token is being stored under auth tokens/GUID. Now, this GUID is actually something we get from the client. So we need this key in order to differentiate different auth tokens that might be coming from, other users all at once. So basically the client generates this GUID, which if you don't know, it's a unique code that is gonna be different every time you generate it. So, you don't have to worry about duplicates right here. And then inside the request, in the state query parameter, it actually sets the GUID. And as a redirect URI, it sets the cloud function, of course. So now right here, we're actually checking if the GUID, actually is being sent through, and also if it is valid. And then if all of the checks have passed, we're actually gonna, as I said, post the token under this branch. And you may say, okay, Nico, this makes sense, but why are we doing this? Like, what's the purpose? Well, in the other method, the client was listening to a local port right after they tried to make the user authenticate. Right now, we are doing the exact same thing, but instead of listening on a local port, we are actually invoking another cloud function to retrieve the auth token. So we have a save auth token function, which actually puts it on the database if everything is correct, and then we have a get auth token function which tries to retrieve it. Oh, also, a thing I forgot to say while recording is, make sure nothing can access the auth token database branch. Go in your Firebase rules and make sure that branch doesn't have any read or writing permissions enabled. And this is the get auth token function. It will require, of course, the same GUID in order to work, and it will actually check if at the same path there is a token. Now, if there is no token, it's gonna return empty, but if there is a token, it's gonna return the token to the client. This way, the client can keep invoking this function until there is a token in the database, and once the token is found and retrieved, we can delete it from the database. This way, the client will receive the token securely, and the method is gonna work. And we did this without opening any local listener on the client. We did this just by using endpoints. So now this might be a little bit confusing, so I'm just gonna play it out again and show you what's exactly happening. But basically this code right here that you can see is actually being executed every 3 seconds if the response is not successful. So if the response is empty, aka the token is not on the database yet. So just to demonstrate, I'm gonna add a debug.log test right here, and you're gonna see this in action. I'm also gonna clean the database, so you're gonna see that the auth token actually gets removed automatically. As you can see, I hit play, and naturally nothing is happening. Once I try to sign in with Google, if I get back in Unity, as you can see, every 3 seconds, it's gonna keep trying to ping the cloud function that I described before. This cloud function right here. This cloud function is gonna check if the token exists, and naturally it doesn't exist yet because we haven't authenticated yet. So now we can go right here, attempt to actually authenticate, and as soon as we authenticate, we're gonna get the response from the cloud function, but also right here, this invocation is actually gonna work, and we're gonna get back the token. So right here, when the request is successful, instead of getting into this branch, which is gonna repeat the request, it's gonna get into this branch. And this function right here is the same as before. It's gonna take the code that we got and exchange it with a real ID token that can be used to authenticate your wonderful requests. And as you can see, it works, because as soon as we exchanged the token, we are printing the user information and we received it correctly. The last thing that I want to say is that you can, of course, customize this message that the user gets back. And you can do this right here on top. You have a success HTML and you have an error HTML. And this could be, it doesn't have to be text, of course, it can be an HTML page. So you can put anything you want right here, or even get it from a file. And also right here, instead of doing response.send success HTML, you can actually do .redirect and put any web page that you want right here. And it's actually gonna redirect the client onto that web page, so you can show your wonderful, successful sign-in screen. And that's it, that's all you need to know. These are 2 equally valid methods to authenticate the user with the Google provider. So hopefully this tutorial video has helped you out. Let me know in the comments if there are any updates or any questions. I'm gonna be linking in the description all the stuff that you need to know in order to make this work. Thank you ever so much for watching this video to the very end. If it did help you out, consider leaving a like and subscribe for more content like this. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. See ya!